I can still hear the way crystal champagne flutes sounded when they touched that night. $300 per bottle, someone whispered behind me. The kind of detail that matters at a Harbor Club wedding. The kind of detail I'd learned to notice after 7 years of being Mrs. Richard Hastings of Beacon Hill. The dress cost $4,000. Silk that draped like water, or at least that's what the personal shopper at Saks promised when she brought it to our townhouse. She didn't say what we both knew, that even $4,000 silk clings differently to a size 18 body, that I would spend the entire evening hyper-aware of every fold, every curve, every inch of space I occupied in that marble ballroom. But I wore it anyway, because this was the Vanderbilt wedding. Because Richard's biggest client would be there. Because being interesting, being perfect, being small and invisible and decorative all at once was part of the job description I'd signed up for. I remember standing near the ice sculpture, a swan the size of a child, slowly melting under warm lights. My hand held a small plate of hors d'oeuvres I hadn't eaten, seared scallops wrapped in prosciutto, $40 each, probably. I was doing the math when I heard his voice. Richard was 10 feet away. I could see the back of his head, his Brooks Brothers suit jacket, the Harvard signet ring catching light as he gestured. He was talking to James Morrison, managing partner at his firm, and 2 other men I recognized from country club dinners. Nantucket summer house men, old money men, the kind who still pronounce it Harvard. I was about to walk over, to join the circle, smile, play my part. Then I heard it. "Your wife seems lovely, Richard. Is she enjoying the evening?" There was a pause, a half second too long. Long enough that even James Morrison shifted his weight. "My wife." Richard's voice had that tone. The one he used when a waiter got his order wrong at number 9 Park. Polite condescension wrapped in practiced patience. "She's not interesting. Not like the women here." I stopped breathing. The scallops slid slightly on my plate. I caught them. I didn't move. Around me, the ballroom continued spinning. A string quartet played something Vivaldi. Women in Valentino and Chanel air-kissed near the champagne tower. The swan kept melting. "I mean, she's fine," Richard continued. I could hear the smile in his voice, that charming smile that had convinced me to move into his world 7 years ago. "But you know how it is. After a while, dinner conversation gets repetitive." Someone laughed. Not James Morrison, one of the Nantucket men. I looked down at my dress. $4,000 of silk that suddenly felt like a costume. I thought about the morning, the 3 hours of preparation, the blowout at the Newberry Street salon, where the stylist kept saying gorgeous in that voice service workers use when they don't mean it, the Spanx that left red marks on my ribs, the makeup applied with the precision of war paint, all of it to be not interesting enough. I didn't walk over to Richard. I turned, smoothly, gracefully. Years of cotillion classes and charity galas had taught me how to move through rooms like I belonged there. I set the plate down on a passing waiter's tray. I smiled at someone's wife whose name I couldn't remember. I made my way to the ladies' room, where I stood in front of a gold-framed mirror and stared at myself. The woman looking back was me, size 18 in designer silk, professionally styled hair, flawless makeup, standing in a bathroom that cost more than most people's cars. Not interesting. I didn't cry. I think that's what surprised me most. No tears, no trembling hands, just a strange, cold clarity, like something had crystallized in my chest, something sharp and bright and permanent. When I walked back into the ballroom, Richard was still talking to those men. He didn't notice me watching from across the room, didn't notice how I studied him for the first time in years, really studied him. The way he held his scotch, the way he laughed just slightly louder when James Morrison spoke. The way he existed in spaces like this, comfortable and entitled and completely unaware of what he'd just broken. We drove home to Beacon Hill in silence. Our townhouse on Mount Vernon Street glowed like a magazine cover in the dark. Red brick, black shutters, window boxes I'd planted with seasonal flowers, a door with a brass knocker that I polished every Sunday. Richard talked the entire drive. About the wedding, about connections he'd made, about a potential new client from Greenwich. His voice filled the car like background noise. I said nothing. He didn't notice. In our bedroom with its crown molding and antique 4-poster bed, I hung the $4,000 dress back in its garment bag. Richard was already in the bathroom, electric toothbrush humming. I stood at the window overlooking Charles Street. Gas lamps flickered below. A couple walked their dog past the wrought iron fences. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning, but something had shifted. Something I didn't have words for yet. Something that would grow in the silence I was only beginning to learn how to use. He fell asleep within minutes, the way he always did, confident and unburdened. I lay awake until dawn, watching shadows move across our ceiling, thinking about the word interesting and what it might mean to become it again, on my own terms, in ways he would never see coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what happened next. Because what I did in those following 3 weeks, that silent, strategic period when he thought everything was fine, that's where this story really begins. And trust me, it was anything but boring. I didn't say anything the morning after the wedding, or the day after that. Richard never asked if something was wrong. Why would he? In his world, nothing had changed, but I started watching. It's amazing what you notice when you stop performing and start observing. Tuesday evening, dinner at Menton with his college roommate and wives. Richard introduced me as my wife, without using my name. I counted. He did it 3 times. Always my wife, never Catherine. Like I was an accessory, a +1 with a pulse. I smiled through the oysters and the Dover sole. I laughed at the right moments, but I was taking notes in my head. Thursday night, benefit gala at the Museum of Fine Arts. I wore emerald silk this time, another expensive costume. Richard spent 40 minutes talking to a woman named Sloane, some venture capitalist from Cambridge. They stood close, too close. Her hand touched his arm 4 times during one conversation. I watched from across the gallery, pretending to admire a Monet. When I joined them, Richard's face did something interesting. A micro-expression. Annoyance, maybe. Or inconvenience. Like I'd interrupted something important. "Darling," he said. That word he only used in public. Sloane was just telling me about her startup. Sloane looked me up and down. I know that look. Every woman over a size 12 knows that look. "How lovely," I said. I smiled. I excused myself to the powder room, but I remembered her name. The townhouse on Mount Vernon Street became a museum of details I'd previously ignored. The way Richard checked his phone constantly at breakfast. How he'd started going to the gym at odd hours. 6 in the morning, 9 at night. Never consistent. The receipts in his suit pockets from restaurants I'd never been to. Expensive places. Always 2 entrees on the bill. I didn't confront him. I photographed the receipts. Quietly, carefully. I'd become very good at being invisible after all. He'd trained me for this without realizing it. Our bank account told stories too. I'd always had access. Joint checking, joint savings. The perks of being Mrs. Hastings. But I'd never actually looked closely. Why would I? I trusted him. That was my first mistake. I started reviewing statements. 3 years back. Every transaction. The pattern emerged like invisible ink under heat. Cash withdrawals on specific dates. Hotel charges in Boston when he claimed to be working late. Venmo payments to someone named A. Chen. Small amounts. 300 here. 500 there. The kind of money that doesn't raise flags unless you're looking for flags. I was looking now. It was week 3 when everything crystallized. A Wednesday afternoon. November cold settling into Boston's bones. I'd walked down to Charles Street for coffee at Tot, the boutique cafe where Beacon Hill women pretended calories didn't count if the pastries were artisanal. I was waiting for my latte when I saw her through the window. Young, maybe 28, Asian, beautiful in that effortless way that requires tremendous effort. She wore a Burberry trench coat and carried a leather portfolio. She walked into Tata with the confidence of someone who'd been there before. Then I saw Richard. He was already inside, sitting at a corner table. I hadn't noticed him when I walked in because I'd been looking at my phone. But there he was, my husband, at 3 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, when he'd told me he had back-to-back meetings until 6. He stood when she arrived. He kissed her cheek. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing you could point to and say, affair. Just familiar enough to mean everything. I was standing 10 feet away. The barista called my name, Catherine, my actual name, the one my husband forgot to use. Richard didn't hear, didn't turn, didn't see me. I picked up my latte. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I walked past their table, slow, deliberate. I wanted to see if he'd notice, if some instinct would alert him that his wife was 5 feet away while he smiled at another woman. Nothing. I walked out of Tata, crossed Charles Street, stood in front of the antique shop where we'd bought our bedroom dresser 7 years ago. A piece I'd spent 3 weeks selecting. A piece that cost more than some people's cars. Then I took out my phone, and I photographed them through the window. Clear shot. His face. Her face. The intimate way they leaned across the table. The timestamp. The location metadata. I didn't feel anything. That's what I remember most. No tears, no rage. Just crystalline clarity. Like I'd been looking at my life through dirty glass and someone had finally cleaned it. I walked home to our townhouse. Our townhouse. That phrase kept repeating in my head. I climbed the stairs to Richard's study. The door was never locked. Why would it be? I was his wife. Trustworthy. Boring. Not interesting. His filing cabinet opened easily. I knew where he kept important documents. Deed to the house. Investment statements. Insurance policies. I'd organized them myself 2 years ago during spring cleaning. I started reading. The deed. Mount Vernon Street. Purchased 2018. I read the names. Catherine Margaret Ashford Hastings. My full name. Sole owner. Not joint. Not his name at all. I sat back in his leather desk chair. The one I'd given him for his birthday. I read it again. Sole owner. Then I remembered. My grandmother's trust. The down payment had come from my inheritance. $600,000. Richard had insisted I put it in my name only. For tax purposes, he'd said. Protection, he'd said. I'd been touched by his consideration. But now I understood. He'd protected himself. If the marriage failed, if I left, he wouldn't lose the house. Because he'd never owned it. Except he'd gotten one thing wrong. He assumed I'd be the one to leave. That I'd be so grateful for his tolerance, his patience with my boring conversation and my size 18 body, that I'd never ask questions, never look closely, never notice. I pulled out my phone, Googled 3 words, divorce attorney Boston. The first result was Patricia Chen, Harvard Law, specialist in high net worth divorce. Her website showed settlements in the millions. Her face was kind but sharp, the face of someone who'd seen every trick. I called her office, made an appointment, used my maiden name, Ashford, Catherine Ashford. Then I called my college roommate, Melissa, the forensic accountant who worked for the FBI. We hadn't spoken in 6 months. I'd been too busy being not interesting. Melissa, I said when she answered. I need a favor. A big one. Catherine? She sounded surprised. Happy. God, it's been forever. What's going on? I think my husband is stealing from me, I said. The words came out calm, factual, and I think I can prove it. But I need your help. There was a pause. Then her voice changed, became professional, focused. Tell me everything. I did. Sitting in Richard's study, surrounded by his things, his degrees on the wall, his success, his carefully constructed world, and I told her exactly how we were going to take it apart, piece by piece, document by document, receipt by receipt. But Richard didn't know any of this yet. He came home that night at 7:30, kissed the top of my head, asked what was for dinner. I'd made his favorite, osso buco, the recipe his mother taught me. We ate in the dining room, candlelight, good wine, conversation about his day. I asked all the right questions. I laughed at his stories. I was the perfect wife. And the entire time, I was calculating, planning, preparing. 3 weeks since the Harbor Club. 3 weeks since not interesting. But he had no idea that interesting was exactly what I'd become. Just not for him. Never again for him. Patricia Chen's office overlooked Boston Harbor, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of view that costs $1,000 an hour, which, coincidentally, was exactly what she charged. You've done well, she said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. Bank statements, photographs, receipts, text message screenshots I'd retrieved from the cloud backup Richard didn't know I had access to. Most women come to me with feelings. You came with evidence. I had 3 weeks to prepare, I said. She looked up. Something like respect crossed her face. The house is entirely yours. Sole ownership. That's leverage. The initial investment capital for his partnership stake came from your family trust. That's more leverage. And this, she tapped the photograph of Richard and the woman at Tot. This is just confirmation of what we already know. What happens next? We document everything. File strategically. Make sure when we move with force. She leaned back in her chair. Men like your husband rely on women like you staying quiet, staying grateful. The moment you stop performing that role, their entire world shifts. I thought about the word performing. 7 years of performance. The perfect wife, the grateful wife, the wife who took up space apologetically and made herself small in every way that mattered. "I'm done performing," I said. Patricia smiled. It wasn't kind. It was professional. Precise. Good. Then let's begin. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in duplicity. I attended every dinner, every function, every tedious charity event where women in Cartier jewelry pretended to care about causes they'd never understand. I smiled. I laughed. I played the role I'd perfected. But underneath, I was dismantling everything. Melissa, my forensic accountant friend, found irregularities in Richard's business accounts. Nothing illegal, just convenient. Expenses charged to the partnership that benefited him personally. The kind of thing that wouldn't look good in front of senior partners. The kind of thing that could cost him everything he'd built. I transferred my grandmother's remaining trust fund to an account he didn't have access to. $500,000. Money I'd never touched because Richard said we didn't need it. That I should save it for emergencies. This was an emergency. The studying I'd abandoned to be his wife? I reached out to BU's graduate program. The art history degree I'd put on hold. They remembered me. Welcomed me back. I enrolled for spring semester. Richard never asked about my days. Never noticed the application materials on my desk. Never noticed anything except his own reflection. And then came the Museum of Fine Arts Gala. Annual fundraiser. Black tie. The kind of event where Boston's elite pretended old money still mattered. Richard brought a colleague. That's what he called her when he introduced us in the marble foyer. "Catherine, this is Amanda Chen. She's new to the firm. I thought I'd show her how we do things in Boston." Amanda Chen. A. Chen from the Venmo transactions. The woman from Tat. She stood in front of me in a red dress that probably cost more than my wedding dress had. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I need to know something. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone ever made you feel like you weren't enough, leave a like on this video. Subscribe to this channel because I share real stories about women who refuse to stay small. Comment below and tell me your story. Have you ever been dismissed by someone who should have valued you? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because what comes next, what I did in that moment, it matters. So here's what happened. I smiled at Amanda Chen, extended my hand. "Welcome to Boston," I said. My voice was warm, genuine. "The firm is lucky to have you." She looked confused. Guilty, maybe, like she'd expected claws. Richard looked relieved. I spent the evening being charming. Interesting, even. I talked to Amanda about her work, her background, MIT graduate, patent law specialist, smart, accomplished. Everything Richard apparently found fascinating. I watched him watch us talk, watched him relax, watched him think he'd gotten away with it, that his boring wife was too stupid or too grateful to notice what was happening 3 feet in front of her. At the end of the night, Amanda thanked me. Actually thanked me for being kind. "You're lovely," she said. She seemed to mean it. "So are you," I replied. And I meant it too. She wasn't the villain. She was just younger, thinner, convinced she was special because a man in a good suit paid attention to her. I'd been her once, 7 years ago, before I learned that special is just another word for useful. On the drive home, Richard was euphoric. "That went well," he said. "Amanda really fit in. I think the partners will be impressed with how I'm mentoring her." Mentoring. That's what we were calling it. "She seems very capable," I said. He reached over and squeezed my hand. A gesture of appreciation, like I'd performed especially well tonight, like I'd earned a gold star for being understanding. "You're a good sport, Catherine," he said. A good sport. Not interesting, not intelligent, not remarkable. Just a good sport. The kind of woman who doesn't make waves, who doesn't ask questions, who accepts her role and stays in it. "Thank you," I said. We pulled up to Mount Vernon Street. Our townhouse glowed in the dark. My townhouse, actually. But he didn't know that yet. Inside, Richard poured himself scotch, talked about partnership politics, about his trajectory, his future, always his. I listened. I nodded. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, and I texted Patricia Chen. "File Monday morning, early." She responded immediately. Confirmed. "Process server will be at your house at 7. I looked at Richard's side of the bed, the expensive sheets I'd chosen, the pillows I'd fluffed that morning, the life I'd maintained while he dismantled my worth one comment at a time. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow he'd learn what interesting really meant. Tonight, I'd sleep in my house, in my bed, as his wife one final time. But when morning came, when that process server knocked on our door, Richard Hastings would discover that boring women keep excellent records, and interesting women know exactly when to stop being quiet. Monday morning, 6:45. Richard was in the shower when the doorbell rang. I was already dressed. Black suit, the one I'd worn to my grandmother's funeral, appropriate for endings. I opened the door. The process server was younger than I expected. Professional. He held a manila envelope like it contained nuclear codes. Catherine Ashford Hastings? That's me. These are for you to keep. The duplicate set is for Richard Hastings. I took both envelopes. Thanked him. Closed the door quietly. The shower was still running. I could hear Richard singing. Something from college. Off-key and confident. I sat in the living room. My living room. On the sofa I'd selected from that boutique shop on Newbury Street. I set his envelope on the coffee table. Perfectly centered. Impossible to miss. Then I waited. He came downstairs at 7:15. Hair still damp. Brooks Brothers suit. Hermes tie I'd given him last Christmas. He was scrolling through his phone, already half gone into his day. He saw me. Saw the envelope. His face did something complicated. "What's this?" "Divorce papers," I said. My voice was calm, factual, like I was telling him the weather. "You're being served. There's also a temporary restraining order preventing you from accessing certain accounts or removing items from this property." He stared at me, then at the envelope, then back at me. "Is this a joke?" "No." He opened it. I watched him read, watched his face change as he processed the words. Irreconcilable differences, asset division, evidence of adultery. I'd included photographs, time-stamped, dated, the cafe, the restaurants. Amanda Chen. "Catherine, we can talk about this." "We really can't." He sat down. The envelope crumpled in his hands. "You're upset about something I said. At the wedding. I know I can be thoughtless sometimes, but this is extreme. You said I wasn't interesting." I leaned forward slightly. "You were right. I spent 7 years being useful instead. Useful for your career, for your image, for your comfort. But useful isn't the same as valued. That's not fair. The house is in my name. Sole ownership. The down payment came from my trust. $600,000. I watched him process this. Your partnership stake was funded with my family money. I have the wire transfers. The initial capital was mine. His face went pale. The charity connections you use? My mother's friends? The summer invitations to the Cape? My college roommate's family? The clients you've cultivated? They know the Ashford name, not Hastings. You can't do this. I already have. I stood, picked up my purse. My attorney has copies of everything. Your managing partner received a package this morning. Nothing illegal, just concerning. Expense accounts, personal charges, the kind of thing partnerships frown upon. And Amanda Chen's employment contract prohibits romantic relationships with senior associates. That's in the packet too. He stood now, angry, desperate. You're destroying my career. No, you did that when you decided I wasn't worth respecting. I walked toward the door, stopped, turned back. I'm keeping the house. You'll be notified where to send your belongings. My attorney will contact yours regarding asset division. Catherine, please. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I'd shaped my life around, who'd made me feel small, boring, not enough. He looked smaller now, older, afraid. Goodbye, Richard. I walked out, down the steps of the townhouse on Mount Vernon Street, past the gas lamps and the brick sidewalks and the wrought iron fences. I didn't look back. 3 months later, the divorce was final. I kept the property. He kept his debts, and the apartment I'd discovered he was renting for Amanda. The firm didn't fire him. They didn't have to. His biggest clients quietly transferred to other attorneys. The partnership track evaporated. Amanda Chen requested a transfer to the New York office. Approved immediately. I stayed in Boston, in my house on Beacon Hill, but I redecorated. Removed every trace of him, every photo, every memory. I turned his study into a reading room, applied to BU's art history program, got accepted, started classes in January. I joined a book club, took a pottery class, started volunteering at the Gardner Museum, not for status, for myself. 6 months after the divorce, I saw him on Charles Street. He was walking alone, no designer suit this time, just jeans and a jacket, He looked tired, ordinary. I was with friends, real friends. Women I'd met through classes and interests that had nothing to do with being someone's wife. We passed each other on the sidewalk. He stopped, opened his mouth like he might say something. I nodded, polite, distant, the way you acknowledge a stranger, and I kept walking. Because here's what I learned. Some revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclamation, taking back what was always yours, your space, your worth, your life. Richard said I wasn't interesting, but interesting is subjective. To him, I needed to be decorative, convenient, small. To myself, I'd always been fascinating. I just forgot for a while. Every night now, I lock the door of my Beacon Hill townhouse. I pour wine in the kitchen I renovated. I sit in rooms filled with art I chose, books I'm reading, projects that matter, and I sleep perfectly, in a bed that's entirely mine, in a life I built back from silence. He took my confidence for a moment. I took the world he built on my back, forever. Some women scream their revenge. I filed mine in triplicate with a Harvard-trained attorney, and that, it turns out, is the most interesting thing I've ever done.